I say one of my inspirations for this podcast is there was a series that used to run in the Washington Post, and it was like 3 questions with a local philanthropist. I think that's what it was called, something like that. They would find a local philanthropist and ask them 3 questions, and it was actually, I think, my first interview. Yeah, my first interview on this podcast was with Barbara Harmon, who's a big time funder here in DC. And one of the questions they asked her is, "What was your favorite season?" She picked autumn, which is a fine season, but I didn't really learn anything about her as a philanthropist from that question. And the Washington Post had an opportunity to ask a local philanthropist who has a lot of influence in this town 3 questions, and it should have been serious questions. And I happen to know Barbara, and when she came on my show, she was pretty happy about the opportunity to give full answers to serious questions. We even dove farther into her love of autumn than the Post originally left.
The reason I was laughing is because I was wondering, did she say something like giving season? I thought it was going to be some sort of philanthropic response.
No.
But it wasn't. It was so open-ended, she didn't have to.
No, and you look at the entire history of that series, they've never really asked a serious question of anybody. It's just sort of aren't these philanthropists great? Let's, let's profile them and take up some space in the newspaper. I will say, if you want to walk around in DC criticizing philanthropists or asking them hard questions, right, you'll get a bit of a reputation. That is something that happened to me. And there are philanthropists who won't speak to me. There are also philanthropists who will speak only to me. So, right, I think and it's one of the things that happens in philanthropy is if you want to go out and please everybody, you're going to fail.
Absolutely.
Absolutely no chance of success on that front.
No chance of success.
And I kind of measure my success by how many people are think I'm the problem.
If you're not shaking something up, then what's the point?
Yep.
What is the point?
Well, yeah, exactly. If everybody's happy with what you're doing, then you should have some questions about what you're doing. I certainly would.
Right. That's how I feel. I agree with that completely.
Hello, everybody. This is Dave Moss with the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast, and I'm here with Aleah Bacquie Vaughn. Did I get your middle name right?
It's Bacquie.
Bacquie?
It's my last name. My last name before my marriage.
So Bacquie is your maiden name, and you married Mr. Vaughn.
I said, I did.
Good. He sounds like a lucky guy. Aleah Bacquie Vaughn. And one of the things that I used to do in the early days of the podcast that I haven't done in a while is I would find a bio from my guest on the internet and then read the bio out loud to them, which is something that I actually find quite useful in the space. You have a good bio. It's every single sentence of it is relevant. It's not necessarily true for everybody in the sector. But I'm going to go ahead and read your bio to start things off, and then we'll get into some questions for you.
Okay.
Aleah Bacquie Vaughn, Executive Director of the CJI Fund, was previously Deputy Director at the American Committee on Africa and the Africa Fund, where she championed the release of political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu, as well as divestment from companies doing business with South Africa's apartheid government. In South Africa, Aleah worked for the South African Council of Churches to decrease violence in the East Rand, on the Independent Electoral Commission to educate communities about voting in the country's historic first democratic elections, for the World Council on Religion and Peace, which first called for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and for the Women's Development Foundation, which supported electing women to national government. Returning to the U.S. in 1996, Aleah worked on the Jubilee campaign to cancel African debt and demand HIV/AIDS medication for African countries. As Director of Social Justice Ministries for Riverside Church, she supervised 13 social justice ministries, including the Sharing Fund and Prison Ministry. She also created the Prison Family Support Group and Sojourners, a ministry to support and advocate for releasing people detained in U.S. facilities. She then served as Director of Grants and Training at the Peace Development Fund. Aleah is the granddaughter of Irene Morgan of the Morgan v. Virginia Supreme Court decision against segregation in interstate travel. The Freedom Rides support her case. Aleah is now the proud, fierce mother of 2 black boys, and also the wife of a Mr. Morgan, I assume.
Yeah. Mr. Vaughn.
Mr. Vaughn, sorry. I had Morgan in my head from the... So you've had quite a career. Good job.
Thank you. Still in it.
Yeah, and you're still in it, which we appreciate. And I imagine lots of work left to do.
Yes, lots and lots of work left to do.
Some of that
We're
work,
working on racial justice. That's the way it is.
so, yeah, indeed. And some of that work will be a good long interview with me, so that the audience can hear about your experiences and stuff. So I like to start at the beginning. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
Well, I was born and raised in St. Albans, Queens, and in Roosevelt, Long Island. I lived in Queens until I was 7 years old. I was the firstborn of 3 girls and the secondborn of 5 granddaughters. In Queens, we lived in a middle-class, predominantly Black neighborhood. I lived with my parents and my grandparents. I felt very, very loved by my entire family, and I was indulged. My sister Shoshana and I went to Jamaica Jewish Center for pre-K and kindergarten. First grade, I went to a school out of Bayside, Queens, which was overwhelmingly white, and the bus company would take all the white children to school first, and then they'd come back for us. And so we were always late to school. Yep. And we were waiting out there in the rain, in the heat, in the cold, and we'd get in, and our teachers would not be happy. And I remember my teacher, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Katz, would ask the class questions, and I would always raise my hand because I was an enthusiastic student until I got there. And she would say, looking at me, she would say, well, since nobody knows the answer, let me explain. And so there was just a clear hostility. She wouldn't let me go to the bathroom. I wet myself one time, I remember. And my mom was like so angry. She came up there, and by the time we finished, my mother had enrolled me in the neighborhood school. And so I finished my first grade with Mrs. Apple, who was the most loving, wonderful teacher anybody could have. My second grade was in that same school. And then we moved to Roosevelt, Long Island. Huge, really quick white flight. And my school, Harry Daniels, I had like a Black teacher for the first time in my life. And I was like really excited. Miss Aleah Collins, her name even sounded like mine. I was on a girl crush for sure. She was a great teacher. She taught us algebra in 3rd grade. We were like really rocking and rolling. And then she got married and she left to move to California. We had this other new teacher who was like, why are we wasting this time on this kind of stuff on these little Black kids? This is like not a thing. And I literally remember this little boy, this brilliant little boy in class with me, and how his entire face, his whole being was crushed in that moment. And I remember like coming home and telling my mom about it, and she moved me from that school. In my 4th grade, I went to a Quaker school, Queen's Academy, and that was like a dream school. But I remember that clearly I had this aptitude in math, but by the time I got to Friends School, I had to be in a bridge class between 3rd and 4th grade math, because just that experience with that teacher had so harmed me that I had internalized basically this racism. I had internalized it. And so that experience though at Friends was so loving that, it was just a few months in that bridge math class. And then I kind of gave my confidence back because I was in a supportive educational environment. And so I just learned a lot from that. So my household, my mother, my father, my grandparents, they loved me fiercely. We had a really almost idyllic childhood, except for the fact that my parents separated and my father had schizophrenia. But by the time we were in 5th grade, my sisters and I went to a parochial school, Episcopal school in Oceanside. My parents divorced.
So just to interrupt, you're in 5th grade, and so far you've gone to Jewish day school, Quaker school, and now you're going to Catholic parochial school?
Right, exactly. Okay. I've gone to Jewish day school. I've gone to a segregated white school. I've gone to a predominantly Black city public school, and I've gone to a Black public school in Long Island, and then I've gone to a Quaker school.
And we are at 5th grade.
Now in 5th grade, I'm going to an Episcopal school.
Okay, the Episcopalians, yes.
Yeah, so my experience was extremely diverse religiously,
yep.
And it really taught me a lot about really the commonality of religion, and in terms of the basic core values, like they're all the same, right? Treat each other right, be kind, love one another, tell the truth, and that was like a common theme in all of these schools.
Yes, there is quite a bit of similarity in the values of the various so-called Judeo-Christian religions. The same source material, I suppose. It's fairly. A lot of people have a lot more homogeneous religious upbringing than you've had. And again, you've only taken us up to 5th grade and such. So did you just continue to change? Did you go to a different religious school each year until you graduated, or?
What do you mean by change? Like,
well, we've got to 5th grade.
I was the same person.
I mean, change. I just meant switch schools. Did you just keep switching schools each year?
No, from 5th to 10th grade, I stayed in the same school, St. Agnes Episcopal School in Oceanside, where there were too many racial incidents to count. It's primarily coming from the students, primarily, with the exception of the headmaster, who was very clearly racist, but was never overtly racist in that he wouldn't call you the N-word. But I remember, for example, one time being called into the red room. We used to call it the red room because it had a red carpet. It was a place where you got called like if something was wrong.
Yep.
And Father Cook said, so how did you get, these grades? Like, how do you get higher grades than Michael Fleischman? And I was like, I couldn't believe he was actually asking me that. So I said, I studied. So anyway, it was like that kind of school, where you had to like explain to the white headmaster why you were doing well as a Black person. So by the time I got through 10th grade, when I got to 11th grade, I told my mom, hey, I can't not another year go through this experience. I've got to get out of here. I can't promise you that I'm not going to like lose it one day with this guy. So my mother pulled us out of that school, my sister and I, Shoshana, and we went to a Catholic school. And we finished the last 2 years in a Catholic school. And my sister graduated. She was so good with school. She and very smart. So she graduated with me. We both graduated together and then went to Cornell.
You both went to Cornell?
Yeah, she went to
that's a good school.
One school, and I went to another school at Cornell. Yeah.
I had a couple friends who went to Cornell, and when I was in college, I got to visit a couple times, which is how I know that Ithaca is gorgeous.
Ithaca is gorgeous. It definitely is.
It's a very impressive gorge that you have there.
Yeah.
I forget.
Beautiful campus.
My friend Kyle was a member of a fraternity on campus, and the fraternity house was right on the gorge with a terrific view and everything. And I do recall when we finished the keg, throwing it off of the porch into the gorge, which I'm sure I should not have done. But at the time,
certainly not.
It was strongly encouraged at the time, and I will admit that it was fun. So you mentioned a sister named Shoshana?
Yes, I have a sister named Shoshana and one named Janine. So there was the three of us.
I've met many Shoshanas. They've every Shoshana I've met, and I've met quite a few, has been Jewish. Is your sister Jewish?
She is not. And Aleah is actually a Jewish name as well. So it's like the Leah with the A front.
Yes.
You know, Aleah.
I have met.
Yeshiva, they used to spell it double A, Liyaah, because that is the Hebrew way to spell it.
Yes, Leah is definitely, there's a Leah in the Bible, I believe,
Yes.
but I have met Aleahs and Leahs who were not Jewish. Shoshana, like if someone were to say name an extremely stereotypical Jewish name, I might name Shoshana. So how did she end up? I mean, that's like a Ashkenazi name.
Ended up again this extraordinarily diverse religious experience. So my father was studying Judaism at the time that we were born, and my mother's family had a branch of it that had been like a crew of what people call like the Black Jews.
Yeah.
In New York, and then my grandmother was raised as an Adventist, so all those names kind of work with all of that, and so that's how we got those names. My sister Janine got her name because my father just loved that name, and he really wanted it. My father fought for all three of those names.
He was studying Judaica, you said?
Yeah, he was studying Judaism at the time that we were born. But
for fun
I later found out. So I thought that was the whole story of how I got that name. But then later on, I found out this incredible history, which was that I knew my grandmother was a missionary on my father's side, right? She had been a missionary. She came to the United States and she was preaching, and then she died of cancer when he was only 12. But what I found out was that her mother was Jewish, and had been working for a family in Nazi Germany when they left Germany and came to the United States, and that she was not particularly happy that her daughter married a Christian, and that she converted. So that is still, so that's really, I think that may have been part of the reason that my father had studied Judaism at the time.
Was he just studying it for fun, or was he in school, or?
No. He just started. He taught himself Hebrew.
Of course, people do that all the time.
But he went to
very normal thing to do.
He was going to synagogue, and he taught himself Hebrew, and he was studying. Really, like he was in.
This is very. I am Jewish. Regular listeners to the show will know that. I'm not sure if and David is a name that is often Jewish, but not always.
But very much had the history, very strong.
When there's because we're people who live mostly in diaspora. Most Jews do not live in Israel, and we've ended up all over the world. So all sorts of things have happened. We have one of the committee members at the Unfunded List is Pueblo, member of the Tewa tribe, but also Jewish. In fact, there are probably a lot of Jewish Pueblos, with most of them not knowing that they are Jewish. You may remember something called the Spanish Inquisition. If you were Jewish and you wanted to avoid being inquisited, right, you would say, I'm Christian now and I want to spread Christianity all over the world. Send me to America as a conquistador, right? And then some of them, when they got to America, would just be Jewish again, and a lot of them just sort of, you were like, listen, being Jewish gets you killed, so we're not going to talk about it anymore. And then they went along their lives for centuries without talking about it, and then a variety of things, particularly because genetic testing has become kind of popular in the last few years. You've had natives and lots of other folks realizing that they are Jewish. I often thought that I was, I never liked this term, half Jewish. My father is Methodist. But according to the genetic testing, I'm a lot more than half Jewish. Because apparently Dad, right, he's Jewish as well, just didn't know about it. I also do know that on my...
The thing about imperialism and repression, right? It leads to people going all over the world, right?
Yes.
and
America...
a variety of reasons, some of them good and some of them awful.
America was the place for a long time that was accepting... If you were cast out from your home country, America was the place to go. And unfortunately, I think that reputation has taken a hit since I was born, particularly in recent years. It's still the truth for a lot of people living out in the world. that their dream is to come to America and live here in America.
Very much so.
And life here is pretty good.
Yes, it is.
Compared.
And I always think that it's really important for the people who are constantly talking about how the United States is the best, America's best, that many of those people have never left the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They're talking about it.
Well, you name any any problem we got here, we're not the only ones who have it.
No, we are not.
And we didn't invent. We invented very few of these problems. We've compounded many.
But we exacerbated.
Yeah, oh yeah. But we haven't really been. I mean, the big fundamental problems. We're not old enough of a country to be the primarily responsible one. So that for a long time, American Jews, particularly white-looking American Jews, and they're still pursuing the strategy, the assimilation strategy. They present Judaism as just another religion, just like Episcopalian and the other all the other various religious schools you went to.
Yes.
And that assimilation strategy made it very hard for Jews who don't look like standard Jews to participate in it.
Absolutely.
I don't look like a standard Jew. I have blonde hair and blue eyes, and people in my life, people have been like, thought I was lying about being Jewish. I once got sent.
Unless you take the picture that everyone has proposed all over the world that Jesus is.
Yes, today I look exactly like Jesus, and so it is, which is not what Jesus actually looked like, but it doesn't.
Not at all. That's
no one anymore. Now that I have the beard, I have a Jewish-looking beard, and that has stopped the you can't possibly be Jewish. When I was a kid, it happened a lot. I also grew up in Maine, where there aren't a lot of Jews. I once got sent to the principal's office by my world history teacher because I told her I was Jewish, and she thought that the Jews had gone extinct, so I couldn't possibly be Jewish.
Oh.
Yeah. This is Mrs. Williams, Shelley Williams. If she's
that's me in your educational history.
Shelley, if you're listening, I didn't appreciate that, and we're not extinct. And in fact, there's a lot of people who are Jewish who don't get counted. Just recently, the Pew Charitable Trust came out with the Jewish demographic study, and they've improved a lot of their methodology on how to count Jews. It's not an easy. You can't just go by last name or what we look like. You can't force us all to take a genetic test. We don't register anywhere. It's not a question on the census, so it's difficult to count us all. Yeah. And for a long time, we've been drastically undercounting Jews of color, which I think is one of the biggest problems in the Jewish community globally. We need to count everybody.
I agree.
And the Pew has done a good job. We went up in terms of percentage of the population in the U.S. largely not because there's more of us, but because of methodology changes. They're counting more Jews of color and others, and that's all very interesting. And I often meet, because I grew up in Maine that had no Jewish community, I often meet people of color who actually had more of a Jewish upbringing than I did. I mean, you went to a Jewish day school, and you have a sister named Shoshana.
Exactly.
Your dad speaks Hebrew. There's many things about you that are far more Jewish than me. I think that's one of the keys of us for Jews is to embrace that, particularly in America, where we did pursue this strategy of sort of the opposite strategy, assimilating into the culture. Which, to defend the folks who chose that strategy, they were trying to survive. They were trying to save their own lives.
Exactly.
They did not want to be killed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any strategy that people use for their own survival has got to be respected.
Indeed. I have great grand aunts who were dedicated to finding a Christian scientist to marry so that they could become Christian scientists. This is apparently the most socially, in Boston where they lived, this was the highest echelon religion, apparently, the Christian scientists. And,
wow.
And some of them were successful. So I have cousins who are Christian scientists and this was deliberate. They were like, being Jewish gets you killed.
They're Jewish Christian scientists.
Yes. Yes, I suppose so. No, they made the choice to not be Jewish anymore.
Okay.
And that becomes that's a complicated choice, perhaps for another podcast. One of the things I would say is making that choice wouldn't have saved you from Hitler or any of the other people that tried to kill all the Jews. Very often it is an ascribed identity on us, which is not fair, but that's what it is. And not for nothing, you may know this. You can't just choose to stop being black.
No, can't.
I suppose the passing is a thing that some Black folks have tried.
Yep.
It shouldn't be. We shouldn't have to talk about those kinds of strategies. Just let's stop trying to kill us, and we won't have to come up.
Places, but they don't exist in places where that survival is a question.
Indeed.
So that's the thing that, whenever you see a strategy of people trying to assimilate, then you have to understand that the environment in which they are living and breathing and working is hostile.
Yes. I did go to, I went to boarding school for 1 year, Loomis Chaffee. And I pretended to be Methodist the entire year. You may have seen the movie School Ties. It was not dissimilar to that, except I wasn't the quarterback as the main, and I'm not as handsome as Brendan Fraser. Those are the main differences between that movie and my own experience. But a couple times, folks would start talking about Jews in front of me, thinking that and I had been lying about not being one. And that's why I pretty much tell everybody I'm Jewish right away, because I don't want to listen to one of those rants ever again. Anyway, I wrote the way I wrote this question originally is, as far as I can tell, you're a Christian. I think that's probably still true. You've had basically every single religious education that one could have. Is there a particular faith or denomination that you ascribe to?
I don't ascribe to a particular denomination. I just consider myself a Christian.
Christian.
In the sense that I truly believe in one God, and I truly believe in the tenets of Christianity, which are to love, to honor, to show respect, to not lie, cheat, steal, etc.
I also believe those things.
Yes.
I am not a Christian. I think I'd make a good one.
I didn't even tell you. I interviewed to go to a school, an Adventist school called Whispering Pines, when I was a small child.
Yep.
And I passed everything, and we came to for an interview to see the grounds, right before the school was going to start. And they then all of a sudden freaked out because my last name was Bacquie, so they were they didn't know from Aleah Bacquie what they thought I was right. So when they saw my mother and I, they freaked out, and then all of a sudden they said that I had to take another test, a psychological test. So so they made me do these not photographs, but I had to draw pictures. I had to draw pictures of my family and pictures of myself. And it was clear. So I drew these pictures, but they were blue sky and birds and trees and sun and grass and flowers. And my family, my father was very tall, and my mother and I realized after, because he started to ask some questions of my mother, that this was right after, the doll experiment with the Clarks, and they were looking for me to indicate in some way that I had some, some lack of comfort with my own identity as a Black person, or that there was some pathology in my family that would be reflected in my drawing of my family.
I'm familiar with the doll experiment. I'm not sure everybody listening is.
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to explain?
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. It's just it was a very, very important experiment that talked about the ways in which racism have impact on Black children, particularly on how we internalize racism. And so in the picture, these children were given a Black doll and a white doll who were pretty much the same except for the color. And they always reached for the white doll. They were asked which doll is nice, which doll is pretty, which doll is a good person, which doll is a bad person. And everything that had a positive attribute, they would select the white doll, and everything that had a negative attribute, they select the Black doll. And it was Black kids that were doing it. And so the study indicated that not only were white people working under the assumptions of racism that white was good and Black was bad, but that because all the images and all of the society's privileges were ascribed to white folk, that Black people also internalized that even as young as children, as being in some ways inferior, bad, or not as good as whites. And so that is what I believe this person was looking for when they asked me for that test. When my mother finished, she said, she also didn't allow me to go to that school because she was like, if this is the intro, perhaps you might want to try someplace else. So,
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that. The very interesting study, and I think lots of times when it comes to social issues, we wonder why particular populations might not be advocating for themselves more, or why are they letting this happen to themselves? There's lots of reasons why.
A lot.
It's going to be very hard to get to the bottom of all those reasons. So that's a lot on your background. I have just one more question, and we'll go into your professional career.
Sure.
But there is a question I like to ask everybody. Do you remember the first time that you gave something to someone?
So, as a child, I don't have a particular recollection of the giving because it was just kind of like a constant. Like in my family, it was what was expected of you.
Mm-hmm.
I was always sharing. That's how we thought of it, as sharing with my sisters, sharing with my grandma used to have a daycare, so sharing with all those kids.
So it's not important to me that you get the exact date and time and amount of what you gave. But when I ask the question, what is the first? Do you remember sharing toys with Shoshana?
And Janine, of course. Janine. Yes, definitely. Remember sharing anything. My mother used to take, if she didn't have enough money for each of us to get a candy bar, she would take one candy bar and cut it in 3. When we had something that was only one, as we got older, one person got to cut, then the other people got to choose first, so that would keep.
Yes, we used to do that at summer camp.
So that was
I break, you choose. That's how we split up Twizzlers when I was in summer camp.
I remember my mom picking up a family. She literally saw a mother with 2 kids in a suitcase on the corner near a store that we used to go to, and it was snowing outside, and she just put them in her car and drove them home, and they stayed with us for a few months until the mother got on her feet. I remember my dad giving someone literally his last $5 that was supposed to be our bread. And my mother was upset with him. So it's it's literally been part of me, but I do remember the first time that I felt like an adult where I could actually give to someone. It was in school, and there was a young man whose parents died soon before he got to school, and his sister was trying to support him to go to college, and his jacket, he had a jacket, and remember I told you I went to school for Nelson, Ithaca, very cold. His jacket tore, he didn't have a coat, and I was able to buy him a coat. And I remember that feeling was really amazing.
Yes.
I remember that's one of my
I can imagine it would have been. And you are right. It is cold there in Ithaca, particularly in the winter.
It is cold there in Ithaca. And I know his sister, she didn't have any more money. She was already doing everything she could to get him to school. And he was just going to wear that torn coat. And we were like, I was just like, no, that just can't be. So I got him a coat.
And you have continued in the giving space. Most of your career involved service or giving of some kind. And you're currently, as I mentioned in the bio, you're the executive director of the CJI Fund, the Circle for Justice Innovations. Are you also the founder?
I am not the founder. Not the founder.
You've been executive director for a good long while, right?
Yeah, I came on, and it's this second half of its second year. But the people who were the founders, Trent Dong was the program officer who started this fund, and it was prompted by David Rosenmiller from the.
He sounds Jewish.
Yes, he does.
Is David Rosenmiller Jewish?
And he's actually not.
He's not? Yeah, that's just like I said. It's hard. You can never really assume.
People do assume.
Is he really? He's not. David Rosenmiller is.
Actually, his father too, who provided the money to help start CJI.
Terrific.
Yeah, but I have been here since then.
And the CJI Fund is one of our co-reviewing partners, which we can talk a little bit more near the end. But long before you got this executive director job, Someone
Yeah.
hired you for your first job. What was your first job?
Well, for a very brief period of time, my grandparents had a dry cleaners, and I worked in the counter. I worked at the counter at the dry cleaners, taking in people's, clothes and
And you
giving
would
them
put
their
and you'd put it on the machine, the magical like machine thing with it that rolls all the hangers
No,
around.
I didn't have that much. I wasn't even actually supposed to be working because I wasn't 14 yet.
Okay.
That was why I would write down what the clothes were and everything, and then my grandpa would come and put them on the thing, or my grandma. But that was my first job.
Yeah, I had to get a special farmer's permit to work when I was under 14. And I was allowed to. I was able to drive a car and everything.
So, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear that.
So I wanted to work when I was 13, and I had to get a special farmer's permit in order to be able to work and get paid, which also allowed me to, as long as I was doing farming business, drive a car.
Absolutely.
So I kept
that's right.
I kept a bag of soil in the trunk at all times. So I was always on farming business.
And where was this?
In Maine. It didn't. I wasn't a farmer. My job, the work I was doing had nothing to do with farming, but it was the only way I could.
But you got one anyway.
Well, I just learned that it was a thing you could get. So I've been good at filling out paperwork my whole life, and and I think they still have it. There's actually a lot of states that allow, because there's a lot of family farms. And it's important that they have to be able to drive the tractor and things of that sort. There's 13, 14-year-old men, I would call them men, in charge of their family farms out there right now. And you can't tell them they can't drive a car. They got to run the farm.
Exactly.
And so many states, big agricultural states, still have specialized. And I took
definitely.
I took advantage of it.
That's the case of state New York even.
But you, I think it's cool that not everybody gets that chance to work at such a young age.
By 14, which was the least that I could work in New York, my first job was as a camp counselor. So I had like a little group of kids, and I would take them to different places and make sure they were having fun and not hurting each other, all that stuff.
We manage a very large number of volunteers here at Unfunded List. We have over 700 evaluators.
Wow.
And they all volunteer with us. And every so often, I myself have that's all me. I recruited the evaluators, and I onboard them and train them and steward them or cultivate them, whatever terminology you want to use. But I have no nonprofit management training. I've never attended a course on it. It was not really a big part of any of my previous jobs, except for when I was a camp counselor. Everything I know about volunteer management, I learned either somewhat in the theater. I've done professional theater only a couple of times. Usually, most theater that's done is amateur and done with volunteers, and everybody has to pitch in, and it's a much different mindset. And that's how I'm good at volunteer management. I'm actually I think I probably shouldn't take a volunteer management training because I would just probably learn bad habits or whatever. So you were a camp counselor. Where was this camp?
It was in Roosevelt, where I grew up, Roosevelt, Long Island. Yeah.
So not in the wilderness so much, or do you have wilderness on Long Island?
It was in Nassau County, so it's in it's an hour or less than an hour really to the city, but yeah.
It's a way for camp. There's a lot of young camp counselors every summer out there, and they're getting ready to go back to camp now. It is one of the best experiences I think that young people can still get. Very difficult to get a job if you're a teenager. But as camp counselor, you get a lot of responsibility. You put in charge of a program, or put in charge of this cabin, or put in charge of these kids' lives and stuff. And it's important to learn those things. I'm always tickled when I meet a fellow former camp counselor. What was the name of your camp?
It was just the Roosevelt Community Youth Camp. It was just Roosevelt Youth Center. It was part of the Roosevelt Youth Center, where I used to. I worked there, and then after, I used to tutor kids after school. That was my job. So I stayed with them for a good while.
And then eventually, you were deputy director of the American Committee on Africa, which I believe is a Bayard Rustin influenced organization. He's one of my personal role models.
George Hauser was one of the founding ADs. It was just an amazing experience. I can say I didn't start there that way. I I started as the Religious Action Network coordinator. So I
Religious
was organizing
Action Network.
congregations of different faiths. Yeah, Religious Action Network, or RAN. I was the RAN coordinator, organizing congregations of different faiths to support the anti-apartheid work that was going on in South Africa. So in that time was also to help protect the religious community that was speaking out, and in particular the South African Council of Churches, which you may remember when Archbishop, was then just the Bishop Tutu, was bombed. Koto House, which was their main house, was bombed, and so they were coming under a lot of fire. And so
I'm aware that happened. But I'm not going to say I remember. I don't remember it happening.
No, okay. Well, anyway, it was bombed.
I think I was a little child.
Yes. Well, yeah, probably. It was bombed. So that's what I was doing. I was organizing that and the demand for the release of political prisoners. Among them, Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu and Amon Kasrada and all those other folks, but also all those young people and everyone else who was rounded up and arrested during that period of time for pretty much nothing.
Yes, indeed. And so you were.
I was the coordinator, then I was the human rights coordinator, then I was the deputy director, and then I was the interim ED.
I think I've heard of RAN. Is that Rabbi Saperstein?
He was part of it, but no, but I think he has another one. Also, Rabbi Saperstein supported RAN, but I was working under Y.T. Walker.
I've heard of.
Folks may know, was also the general secretary with Dr. King.
Yes.
So he was like consummate organizer, and he knew everybody, and it really helped a lot.
That's fair. So, so I think it's actually called RAC, Saperstein's thing. It's like RA. Yeah. It's Religious Action something.
Yeah, but he was a part of RAN.
So this was definitely a group. So this was a group of a bunch of different rabbis and pastors
congregations and congregational leaders, and also other religious leaders who were speaking out against.
And like you were saying, a lot of the values in these religions are. I mean, there's certainly differences in practice. Whenever I get inspired to go to Christian service on occasion, or a Christian friend gets married or something like that, and I find myself in church. And the thing that always strikes me is just all the Jesus. There's just so much Jesus.
Yeah, so much. It's so true.
And I don't go in there expecting no Jesus. Like, I understand where I am, right?
It's true. There's a lot of Jesus in church.
I know he's an important part of what's happening. I'm not saying get rid of the Jesus or whatever, but it's just like, yep. And this is why when I'm walking around DC and sometimes I'll run into a group of fervent Christians who see me and think I'm actually Jesus. It's happened more than once. I live in Columbia Heights, where there's a very devout community of Ethiopian Christians.
Yes.
And I can't tell them I'm not Jesus. They won't believe it. I must be.
What about the Ethiopian and Ethiopian Jews too?
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they live. They're not living in my neighborhood. But though it's always very flattering whenever that happens to me. The last time I went to the dentist, right before he was about to knock me out, and he goes, "You ever tell you look like Jesus?" I was like, "Yes." Yes. Is that? Do you need to know that, Doc?
Oh gosh!
I'll be happy to talk to you about that after
that could be upsetting when you go under.
I assumed he's like, well, he's going to do this surgery well. He doesn't want to mess up Jesus' teeth. But the other than, I mean, that's the main difference. It's pretty much the only difference to me between going to Reform or Conservative Temple service and going to Methodist service is just 200% more Jesus. But the non-Jesus stuff is very much the same, particularly when they talk about basic concepts like love, service, things of the truth, things of this sort, are fairly universal. And I imagine you'll find if you were to go to a Buddhist meeting or whatever it is Hindus do, service, I guess, you'd find them talking about some of those same concepts as well. And I imagine if there's people living on other planets practicing strange faiths there, maybe these concepts might actually be truly universal. I think we would find.
Well, when I worked with Rand, we also had Muslims, and we did have Buddhists who were joining us. So we were all united in our clarity around the evil of apartheid. And,
yes, I don't think there weren't any notable churches that were like, yes, this is a great thing you're doing. I mean, there definitely are churches out there preaching messages that I think are contrary to what you'd find in the source material. And
absolutely.
There's generally on an individual, it's not like denomination wide. It's like this church, these communities occasionally get it wrong. I
don't know if I would say that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been to every single service everywhere. But I do.
But don't you think that there's been a lean in, I think that there's been a frightening quiet in a lot of mainline Christian congregations and community, and some of the other traditions around speaking out against racial justice. I think that we're starting to see a serious re-energizing of those communities, but I think that too much space was ceded to a particular narrative of a very particular narrow sector of these religious communities, and I think that it has hurt us a lot as a nation.
I was looking at some statistics this morning on, so it basically they broke it up. People who believe in the QAnon conspiracy by religion, and just like with all conspiracies, Jews are the lowest percentage of people who believe in it.
Right.
And there's a lot. So there's like 2% of American Jews believe in QAnon, and I would really like to meet these 2% of Jews and find out what's going on. How? No, I know they're right. They're very. I know exactly who they are. They live. They're probably members of Mar-a-Lago. And they live down in Palm Beach County. That's who this 2% is.
I bet you're right.
And the 98% of us reject the QAnon conspiracy because it is overtly anti-Semitic.
Exactly.
Some of them are like a little like try to hide it, right? And we usually figure that out. But if you look at
a lot of hiding with QAnon,
it was there are some denominations that are much more likely to believe in this. You might imagine it is evangelical Protestants. About 30% of them believe in QAnon. But
I think that we need to be really clear that this is a reflection of an infiltration of white nationalism within white Christian Protestant churches, which is really frightening and alarming. I think that we really need to acknowledge that and to recognize that unfortunately that is a part of our history. And the nationalism and the religious being merged in some ways, and that we have to stop it. It is very dangerous.
Yes, indeed, it must.
All. And I just feel like I have to say that because, I mean, even within, like when you look at the Christian denominations, you'll find there's not just one Baptist church, right? There's the Baptist, there's Progressive Baptist, there's National Baptist, there's American Baptist, and those rifts are always connected to racial justice issues. One was around slavery, another one is around the civil rights movement, desegregation. And so I just feel like it's really incumbent upon, and you can see the same thing around LGBTQ issues in other churches. And so I just feel like we need to just own up to that and recognize that there is an influence of nationalism, racism that is really actually weakening that fiber of those shared values around the country, and is also contributing to almost, I would say, and I hate to say this, but by some, because I do believe that I go to a congregation where that's not the case, but by some leaders, an actual fear of speaking the truth.
Oh, yeah. I would be pretty afraid to say the truth in to a
And when
someone
yeah,
running a
but I mean,
religious
the truth
service
as it relates
if I
to
disagreed with
U.S.
them.
history, or as it relates to racial justice, the truth as it relates to what's happening to the people at the bottom, like all those things which they were outspoken on advocating for, have actually become areas where they're really being quiet. And I think that quiet is really deafening.
Yes, it was, as I said, it was white evangelical Protestants who were most likely to believe in it. But
Yeah.
white mainline Protestants were, I forget the exact percentage, but it was a high percentage of them, much, much higher than the American population that believes in this conspiracy. And you've also seen, I was reading in the Pew report on Jewish demography, this is true for Jews and it's true for young Christians and others as well. They're either abandoning faith altogether, right, becoming entirely secular, or they're becoming more orthodox. So amongst young Jews, we're much more likely to be. So my parents' generation, I forget all the numbers, but they're very, very likely to be either conservative or reform. My generation is much more likely to be orthodox or nothing at all.
Wow.
Because and I'll tell you, there's a lot of different reform services. Some of them are going to be a little racist, and I imagine that's why you're seeing a lack of interest amongst a younger generation that cares very much about these issues.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know that I'm seeing a lack of interest. I don't necessarily.
Well, they're interested in it, just not. They don't want to engage in racial justice through their church.
That is the case, but because what is the church doing that they would join?
They go and they deal with another. Well, that's why.
What leadership role are they playing?
So this Black Lives Matter is a new organization, and difficult to quantify as an organization, which is the same for churches, right? Right. You can there's the national, and then there's local chapters. They're setting it up in a very similar thing because and it would have been great if churches could have just done that. They were already there. They already had nice buildings. They already have access to their communities. This is what they should be doing. Right, but I think that a new generation of activists just didn't see it as a real possibility, and aren't pursuing it. And some the other direction. I think one of the reasons why a lot of my fellow Jews of my age are becoming Orthodox, right, is because they find themselves excluded and cast out from a lot of those other conversations, and so they ran into the other opposite direction. I think that's probably what's happening to those 2% of Jews who 2% is a margin of error. No Jews actually believe the QAnon conspiracy theory. They just clicked the wrong box.
But I mean, I think that goes to the other part that we didn't talk about, right? The patriarchy and the other issues that we have found in our religious institutions, which have grossly contributed to this concept of.
And the Catholic Church had a pretty big controversy there when I was a kid.
Not just the Catholic Church, almost every religion.
They just had they had the biggest controversy of the one, and I think that
organized.
Yes,
because it was the most organized, and most regimented. But I just feel like this concept of patriarchy, this LGBTQ, transphobia, homophobia, and all of that. I think that it has contributed to younger people, not seeing their religious institutions as places of safety, which is the other thing that they used to be, right? This is like a place you go when you want some measure of peace, some measure of sanity, some measure of being told what's right. And then if you find that is not a place where you're finding safety, then you are going to turn from that. And so that's why I think that these institutions can reclaim their soul, right, by embracing justice struggles and playing leadership roles in them. And so as a part, I'm a part of the EMI, which is the End Mass Incarceration. It's a collaborative of Jewish and Muslim and Christian communities and leaders who are working to mass incarceration collectively. It's based in Atlanta, and it's based in Dr. King's church, right, Ebenezer Baptist Church, but it also is working with the largest congregation of Jews in Atlanta, and they've been working with a number of Muslim leaders as well, and I'm just really, I'm excited by that.
And Ebenezer, that's
They're
the
actually reclaiming this
they
territory.
just sent somebody to the U.S. Senate, right? Just,
Yes, and Warnock just went to the U.S. Senate. It's
he's
also
from.
a friend of mine who I have extraordinarily respected.
I do not know Ossoff. I know most Jews, but I don't know him.
Yeah,
it's only a matter of time before I meet him. He's in D.C. now, and we're both Jewish, so I'm sure we'll run into each other.
Yeah, he's an amazing man. Really, really, he's the truth. He's not pretending to be anything other than what he is.
Well, and that's very interesting too, particularly to the comment that we were just talking about, right? There's this social activism work that Ossoff and Warnock have been involved with, and they have been doing it, in partnership with their faith practice, right, with their churches and temples.
Absolutely.
So
I just want to make it clear that there are bubblings that we are seeing now in faith communities around these issues, which I think has been amazing. For example, I love what happened when Jews came out, when the immigrants were getting detained, and Latino immigrants were getting detained, and they were like, no more in terms of deportation. Like, that was amazing and highly inspiring to me and quite a number of people. And I feel like when we have more of that happening, we're reclaiming the real, the United States that we've all been kind of working toward creating.
So, yes, I agree. I generally think there should be more. I don't like to proselytize, but I also do think there shouldn't be a complete and total disconnect between social justice efforts and faith communities. I have encountered folks who are trying to work on social justice who do not have any time for faith leaders. They don't want to talk about it. It seemed confused to me when I mentioned it. We have another co-review partner, and they asked, who should we be involving in our program? And I said, faith leaders, religious leaders. You don't have anybody, as far as I can tell, who even goes to church in this entire room, right? And or temple, or even you probably have a few people who meditate like in the mornings before their coffee, right? Or have some kind of mindfulness practice, and that's basically just it. They were really they're it's an academic institution, and they're trying to apply rigorous, high-level intellectual work to this to huge problems, right? Global problems, and it would only be bolstered by having faith leaders involved. But they don't. It is confusing to them when I mention that. In particular, there's one of their categories that they fund in is what's called future of work, or some sort of workforce, the future of work or whatever, right? And when I think every single faith has attitudes about work. We Jews value work and have more than one thing to say about it. But particularly Protestants, and this is a majority Protestant country, it works everything. That's the entire basis of that faith. I know because I've read some of their source material. I'm familiar with a guy named John Calvin and the stuff that he had to say. Also, the stuff that Martin Luther had to say, which I don't like as much. Martin Luther wrote an essay about how Jews are. I think it's called "Jews Are Rats." I think, and it's one of the most anti-Semitic documents of all time. And Calvin refused to engage in it. And they were the ones protesting. That's why it's called Protestants. And they had a lot. They were talking about work and what work was like and how work is a virtue. And the people who founded America were Protestants who believe the same thing. And that is how we get a lot of mainstream American values come directly from that. Right? The American dream is about working hard and reaping the awards from that. So you fund at the Circle people who are working on racial justice issues, social justice issues, incarceration justice, which is one of the more intractable issues since I've started working in the field. I imagine some of them have faith as part of the work, but that some don't. Am I imagining correctly?
Yeah, actually, the vast majority of them are not people who are particularly associated with roles in any faith communities, but they are people of very different faiths. So you can have, we have Jews, we have Christians, we don't have a lot of Muslims. We're working on that. We have people who are following traditional African religion, traditional indigenous faith traditions, things like that. So there's a lot of diversity there.
But this is their personal practice. Is Is it
their personal practice,
involved in
but
their
they're
work?
not operating that through. Right, exactly. And they're not operating in that through their work. But we do invite the sacred in our meetings in the beginning, and that is because we feel strongly that any work you do to affirm the humanity of another person is sacred work, and that it's important for us to recognize that and include that in our understanding that we're talking about whole human beings, and that a lot of what we in the United States think about when we talk about organizing is only secular, right? And so that is how we came to understand the significance of the healing work that we support, because we were trying to support formerly incarcerated leaders, people who've been impacted by the injustice of the system. And what we found was that we had to embrace healing work because people have been so harmed, so broken, so hurt, that they need healing work in order to take on any real leadership role, because hurt people, right?
Yeah.
And so if you don't address that hurt and that harm, then you're going to be passing it on. And more than that, we've learned in generational, there's generational trauma, right? And I don't know if you've learned more about the telomeres and how they studied family members who are descendants of people who had been.
Oh yes, I have PTSD
Holocaust,
from.
right?
I have considerable PTSD from, and not just in the Holocaust, but the
Exactly.
Holocaust is just one of many things that happened to us.
Right, and so that has impacted the length of telomeres. That has impacted the life quality. That has impacted.
Yeah, I was even diagnosed with this by a medical professional.
Wow.
I actually had a really hard time. But I had a hard time believing it at first because it's not how DNA was first explained to me.
Right.
But it is. If you the science of it is real. It's not just Jews that this happens to.
No. I was just saying that this was one of the first studies that they did,
yes.
And they've since studied quite a number of people, a lot of kids that have been traumatized even from birth, things that had happened like soon after their birth, in their infancy, things that happened later. And the point is not to depress us all, but to say there's actually things that we can do in our daily lives that can actually change the length of our telomeres, that can actually change our outcomes and our future and our children's future.
We are over an hour into the interview, and I have a couple more big questions I want to make sure I get to. I have learned from my analytics that after 90 minutes, no one's listening. That is the limit. They will listen probably for the full 90 minutes, but they will move on to something else after that.
Okay.
And this is very fascinating. I'm sure a lot of them are still with us. Hello, if you are. Here with Aleah Vaughn. So this, as a practical matter on the funding, right? So the religious funders are going to be so if you're a religious funder, you're one religion probably. There's going to be a few exceptions to that, but like you're a family foundation where everyone's Christian and you give according to Christian values. And I'm sorry, I didn't come through properly there. I'm going to say that again. So if you're a religious funder, you probably, all of the board members share the same religion, right? If it's a Christian funder giving off of Christian values. And just like I said, when I go to a Christian church, it's like an awful lot of Jesus. If you go on to instrumental, they have like a little box that you can click to include religious funders. And, if you click that box, all instantly, you've got twice as many grant matches, right? You're like, oh, wow. And you go in and you look and it's like, and it's Jesus, 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 Jesus. So much Jesus in these RFPs, right? And very clearly, like they want people who are from that specific faith. So I noticed that when you talk about some of the spiritual things you're doing, you talk about healing practice and other sort of nebulous sounding things that could apply to all faiths, right? And that is a difficulty in our sector, is that the funders Jewish funders want to fund Jewish organizations. I'm Jewish. I think the work that we're doing here on Unfunded List is quite Jewish. I am inspired by Jewish values and I live them through the work. I'm never going to get funding from an organization that only funds Jewish organizations, right? And I'm also not, I think the work that we're doing lines up with lots of religious values, but I would never get funding from a specifically religious funder, never, even if I were to convert to that or whatever. We're not set up as a Jewish nonprofit or a Christian nonprofit and that sort of thing. And that's a difficulty, and I think that's why a lot of them are setting up there as secular, because if you are a Christian nonprofit or a Jewish one, right, it can be difficult for you to get funds from secular funders.
Yeah, absolutely.
You would agree that that's why we see what we see with the grantees?
I think that is part of why we see what we see. I also think that usually for those who are applying to CJI, they're the outliers who are the ones who are trying to infuse a lot of justice work in their congregational work or in their denominational work or in their religious institutions and faith traditions. They're trying to reinsert that. And so they may not get money from their institutions for doing that, but they may be doing it. I think what we have found is we try not to make too many assumptions, and we try to dig a little deeper to get a real clear understanding of what's really going on there. So we've had, but in general, I would say, yes, it's very true that there is a major leaning towards secular organizations to fund and support.
Well, thank you very much. Like I said, I do mention religion more than the average nonprofit professional.
Yeah, we talked a lot more about religion than I had anticipated.
I find, whenever I have a guest who has some background in it and can provide some perspective on that, then I try to lean into those topics. And quite frankly, I could talk about religion and the various faiths with you for a good long while. But I'll get some other things that I talk about as well. Your work in South Africa, particularly, you pushed for, and eventually they did have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
So what happened in South Africa was done in such a way that there were whole communities that had been lied to for so long that they didn't really fully embrace the truth of what had happened in their name, right? And so it was really, really critical to those who had suffered that the people who had, not even just the people who perpetrated, violence against them, but the people who hadn't really owned the fact that they were electing people who were pursuing policies that allowed it and that pursued it. They felt it was really critical for them to create a new country that was going to be under a different understanding of humanity, that they had to tell the truth of what happened, and that there had to be some level of reconciliation. I think that you can't have truth and reconciliation without some type of reparation, right? I think that you can't just tell the truth of what happened and then expect people to reconcile when you don't try to repair the breach that you created, right? So that's where I'm coming from. I think that's one of the lessons that we learned, because we have an amazing changes that have happened in South Africa, but we still have really, really egregious poverty and disparities that have persisted. And a lot of that is because of role the U.S. and others played in pushing for a protection of capitalism and capital. But I do believe that we've got to get to a place where there's some reparation, and I think that that's also the case here in the United States.
Yes.
Reconcile, you must tell the truth, and you must repair. You have to do something. It's like what Archbishop Tutu used to tell a story and say, if you come and steal my bike, you knock me on the head and steal my bike, and then you ride away and you ride off with it. It's fine for you to come back and say, I'm sorry I stole your bike, but give me the bike back. You can't then continue to ride around on my bike and then say that everything is okay. So, and I can't reconcile with that. So that's one piece. And then the other thing is that I think that sometimes, almost what Father Lapsley was one of my, I would say he was a mentor to me. One of the things he used to say was that sometimes people are being punished with the expectation of forgiveness. And so, in other words, they are being told that they have to forgive because that's what they're told, what their religion teaches them.
Yes.
But there's no expectation that is something that is a process. That is something that is really more about the individual who's been harmed than it is about the person who did the harm. And there's a lot more work that has to be that has to go on before we have an expectation of that.
Yeah, I will say that there's I think a lot of Americans who believe that forgiveness on its own is a very virtuous thing, right? If someone has wronged you, forgiving them makes you very righteous, right? But if they wronged you and they didn't learn their lesson and they haven't faced accountability for it and you forgive them, they're going to go out and they're going to wrong somebody else.
That's why you have to have the reconciliation and the repair.
I think I would agree. So I would compare the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission to a couple things. One is one that actually happened. We had trials at Nuremberg, and they set up a claims conference, and a couple other organizations in the German government was working on it. I am owed a fortune by the German government. I am never going to. I don't think I'm going to see it. Allegedly, I might someday see it. But there's a lot of things that they did to my people, including the direct theft of property, there's records of it, and you can prove all of that. But they did a lot of other things that are harder. They monetized Jews, for instance. We had a mandate. We had to have health insurance, but there was also a mandate that hospitals weren't allowed to give us care. So we were just paying the government for, and this was all before pre-Kristallnacht stuff.
Right.
There is a very large fund. The Claims Conference has the money. They're working on. I'm talking about today. The Holocaust was a long time ago. They're still working on dispersing this stuff. I at one point, or somebody in my family said, like, you don't need to make us a priority. Jews who are suffering, living in poverty need to be a priority. There are Holocaust survivors living in the U.S. underneath the poverty line. Thousands and thousands of them. Right. Yeah. And there's this huge fund, right? And there was just a trial for a prison guard, Auschwitz prison guard. It was just like a couple weeks ago. So Nuremberg had the reparation you're talking about. It also had, I don't think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission found anyone guilty or punished anyone. I'm not sure.
There were definitely people who, what happened is people actually had to confess what they had done. They had to tell what they had done.
Did they then go to jail?
They did not go to jail. So they had a whole thing. But one thing that they did that we have to learn from is that the South African government created support for those families. They created healing and support for those families so that they could actually process what had gone on, what they were hearing had happened to their loved one. And then people who did not go to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and say what they did could be prosecuted.
Interesting.
So it's still very controversial,
and I would say there's in neither approach perfect, right?
No, you can't be perfect because you can't give people back what you took from them. You can't ever give them back everything you took from them.
Indeed.
With that kind of atrocity, and the same I think is the case in slavery, and the same I think is the case in our history with Native Americans. Every single treaty we ever signed was broken. Every single one.
Yes, and allegedly, some German accountants will someday figure out exactly how much my family is owed, and it won't.
Allegedly.
It won't make a difference. It doesn't. You didn't undo the Holocaust.
Exactly.
There's no in raising the amount wouldn't do it either. However, you should disperse those. you should still disperse the money. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good when it comes to these things. We have there's a couple topics that we've received proposals on from multiple organizations, and they're usually like pretty pie in the sky stuff. Right? We'd like to do this, and we want funding for it. The grants that we read that are like most likely to get funding are like general operations grants for an ongoing nonprofit with a proven track record. You go out there and you want to do something that's never been done before, like a huge nationwide Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? That's going to be very difficult funding to get. But we've received multiple proposals here from multiple groups. As I understand, you wrote one. I don't think you haven't sent it to us for review. I encourage you to. We'll do a good job, and we've read several before. These are, the ones I've read seem to me, I would like to see them funded, which is what we're doing here. I don't think they're going to be at the moment. This isn't something that funders would even know how to do. I think in our minds, right, they would they are more capable than they are. But like even if you went to Ford and you were like, we want to create right, you've got all kinds of money, we want to create, they wouldn't know how to get something like that started. Would probably need to be a law that got passed. I think you'd need to look to I don't even really know how you would do something like this in the U.S. But can you, since you wrote a proposal on it, and it's something that we definitely have unfunded folks that would like to see it happen. What do you think about the possibility of a Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission here in the
Well,
U.S.?
we did not write a proposal for Truth and Reconciliation because, as you said, I think that is way too big for us. What we wrote a proposal for is a particular element of reparations that has to do with going to a root cause of the connection between slavery and the criminal legal system that we have now.
Yes.
So one of those things is the 13th Amendment exclusion for labor being required of people without compensation, which is the case in U.S. prisons, right?
Yep.
So there's literally an exclusion which says nobody can be forced to work without compensation except people who have been convicted of a felony, right?
Yeah, they got in Maine there was a big thing I remember when I was a kid at the governor's mansion. They had prisoners working for free doing the gardening and the lawn work and stuff.
Right. So what we're saying is that should we really have something in our Constitution, both our state constitutions and our federal constitution, that allow for labor without compensation, that would allow for prison labor, that basically becomes slave labor? And so since the vast majority of people are not familiar with that provision that is still in 30 some around the country, as well as in our U.S. Constitution, what we are trying to do is raise awareness and support organizations that are challenging that in the state constitutions, so that there would be an end to labor without compensation, which would mean that they would have to provide, at the very least, minimum wages to people who. Why is that incredibly important? Because it means that people who are in prison and work are going to get some money. That means they'll have something on their books, so they're not in great positions to do everything to get something basic that they don't get provided by prison. That means that they'll be able to send money to their families to help taking care of their children. That means that those communities that are robbed of people who are contributing to their economy are now going to have an infusion of cash as well as those. That means that there are probably going to be fewer children in foster care because parents or other family members who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford taking care of them are now going to be able to receive some money from their family.
So I understand it's the recidivism is very high here, and the poverty is a main cause of crime, and just in general, fundamentally, you shouldn't make someone work for nothing. I'm opposed to slavery, like many other people. Even people who don't have a strong religious background are opposed to slavery.
Exactly. Or should be.
And you're right. What we're doing is just sort of a wordsmith version of slavery. A lot of these, and it's mostly men. A lot of these men, and women as well, but a lot of these men who are being forced to work for nothing. The crime they committed maybe wasn't that much of a crime. We have a lot of stuff on the books that makes it pretty easy to lock people up.
Exactly.
And to stay locked up once you're locked up.
Yeah. So we know that there's some organizing that's going on some states around the country now. We want to support that. We want to create a cohort of them that they would be able to work together to take on the state constitutions. That process in and of itself will increase the understanding people have about this legacy of slavery that is still in our Constitution, and then the case for reparations, as opposed in terms of returning this money to people who have worked for all these years and have gotten nothing. So that lays the ground for also a case that can be opened to have people get the money returned to them, especially corporations. Let's not forget that a large number of corporations, as in many other times in history of humanity, have benefited from this slave labor, and that they should be forced to pay those people who worked for them for nothing.
Yep.
And so that's the case. I mean, it also includes collateral consequences of incarceration, such as, for example, you can't vote in certain states,
Right.
or, you know, there are elements of that, like voting, or you can't, for example, get a barber's license. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Or there's a major fee that
You can't get a barber's license?
Yeah, in certain states, you can't have professional licenses if you have a felony conviction. So people don't understand how this contributes to
any professional license.
Right. Well, no, it depends on the
Sure.
state. And
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the, like, I can see what those people were thinking, but it's just
barber's license. Like, I mean, come on.
Or just, so, why on earth? Why would someone's out of prison, right? Why on earth would the government be trying to make their life harder? They've left prison. Like, why are you?
That is the entire system.
It's almost it's the only purpose is there is like, let's forget them. They should be locked back up. We don't care that you served your time. We'd rather you just go back there.
So this is one of the ways that you can control a population of labor, right? Yeah. You can control a population voting, and you can control a population, how many of them there are, right? If you are locking up that large a percentage of Black men and or women, then you are going to have less people that are Black. And so we have a situation in which in the United States, Black people are still 13% of the population.
Yep.
So there's a lot that goes.
So your proposal and what you'd like to do is but one piece of the truth and reconciliation and reparations work that I would say that the country probably needs to do. And even though it's just one piece, it is you must know this, going to be difficult to accomplish. Right.
But not impossible.
Not impossible. No. Anything worth doing is going to be difficult to do.
So many things in my life I've been told were not just difficult, but were impossible.
I don't want to tell you impossible.
Never be released alive. They told me that abolition was a crazy concept, and CJI was never going to last. They told me lots and lots of things in my life that I just did not believe, because I knew that really over time justice is going to win out.
Well, they've told me some of those things as well. When I told them I was going to review rejected grant proposals, you can imagine what some of them had to say about that.
I don't even want to.
In general, a lot of people in philanthropy in particular, like, understood what I was doing, but in the beginning, several were like, "What is this? I hate this," and like started making phone calls behind my back, and I think they thought I was going to try to embarrass the foundations, but I think they do a fine job of embarrassing themselves. So in order for you to be successful, you're going to need like several local grassroots groups to have state level victories, right? To build up a number of case studies, right? And then maybe eventually have some pressure federally. Ultimately, the last thing that would happen, I think, is a Supreme Court case.
Yeah, probably would be a Supreme Court case. But let me just say that this work is already happening.
Yep.
It's just a question of whether we're going to support it and whether we're going to help convene people in one way or another, could be virtually or whatever, so that they can share what's going on in their other places. There's I think at least 3 states right now where this is about to be it's going to come up for vote in the next.
It's going to an issue I worked on is somewhat similar. As I worked at a place called the National Youth Rights Association for a while, and one of our core issues was that we were opposed to corporal punishment in school, which a lot of Americans are surprised to find out that that's something that happens in American public schools. And even though it's been a full 10 years since I worked on this issue, I'm not going to remember all the stats and everything, but I believe it's 19 states that allow corporal punishment in public school. I was involved in getting it banned in New Mexico, and functionally, it's still technically legal in Colorado, but they haven't hit anybody in decades now. We've killed kids this way. There was a Department of Education study a little while ago. We've killed dozens of kids through corporal punishment in school. You'd think the first time we killed a kid, we would stop hitting them, but no. Throughout the South, a lot of administrators are convinced that it's essential for maintaining order and discipline.
I know.
And if you look into who's getting hit, it is almost entirely Black boys.
Absolutely.
or occasionally black girls who like don't dress right,
Yeah.
but usually black boys.
Which coincides with the suspension rates, right?
When
Black
they become
boys
much
and
more
then
likely,
black
and they
girls.
just it starts them down into the. It's a good way to get into the prison, the school to prison pipeline. Oftentimes they get hit and they don't go back because they got hit there. I don't want to go
Exactly.
back. That guy's hitting me. He has a big paddle that he uses, and no one's going to stop him. If he hits me to death, he has immunity.
Yeah.
An actual true thing. The
Yeah.
the main frustration working on that is we would find potential partners, potential donors, lawmakers that were interested in it. Senator Tom Harkin did not know. He was the chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Commission in the Senate, and I'm the one who told him corporal punishment was still legal in America. It's really under the it does not happen even in Texas, where they hit more kids in Texas than the rest of the world does legally. They're hitting, in the Philippines they're hitting kids, but it's actually illegal there. 40,000 kids a year in Texas legally paddled, and it's not in the Austin school district or the Dallas school district or the big cities that the senators might visit and talk to those superintendents right on their site visits. It's way out of town where they're just not going to talk about it.
Exactly.
They have to report it in order to get some of their federal funds, which is how we know about it. It's obviously drastically underreported, and they're still saying they hit 40,000 kids.
Yeah.
And I know
40,000.
we would meet a lot of people who would think, right, and Senator Harkin thought this too in the beginning. This is low hanging fruit. We got to stop this, right? And they start working on the issue, and they get burnt out very quickly when they see how it's not going to be fixed. They're going to keep hitting those kids.
Well, it can be fixed because all they have to do is say federal dollars are depending on it.
Yeah, and that bill has been introduced every single session of Congress since I was born, and it's never gotten out of the House. So it's going to be harder than, right? And it seems like this is a bill that says if you hit children, you don't get money for educating children. It seems like something that no one should be hitting children in the first place. We shouldn't have had to write this, but since we did, here it is, right? It's Carolyn McCarthy introduces it pretty much every year. I love her. It's not gonna get through now this year. I mean, I don't like saying I don't like saying things are impossible because I've seen impossible things happen. But a lot of the work that gets done in the justice space is extremely difficult to accomplish. You and I know this. People who are making their first foray into philanthropy or social justice work or activism might think it's going to be easier. Right? Might think that this issue looks like low hanging fruit and we're going to have a lot of victories really early, right? Or they're going to go to one march. Right? I've been to some marches and they're usually a nice time, but you don't actually get anything done at them. Like no laws get passed, hardly anybody. Like, and they're good for a lot of reasons, fundraising, lots of things, getting the word out. Like, but in terms of actual tangible change, there needs lots of other stuff has to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But it does help create the pressure for the law to be considered in ways that it wouldn't have been sometimes, depending on the issue and the timing.
Well, I think, and we had actually some funding for it. But one of the things we didn't really anticipate is that there would be well-funded lobbyists opposed to us. Right? There are well-heeled folks out there that want those schools to keep hitting kids, and and I know why they want to. I know why they want that. Right? Some of these folks are coming from those companies that are getting free prison labor, and they know that corporal punishment leads to more prisoners, and they're actively trying to keep corporal punishment on the books. That's what you're up against, even when you go up against low-hanging fruit like stop hitting children in school.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you're going to find people who, when you say we should pay prisoners, they're going to say, well, they're prisoners. They shouldn't have committed a crime.
Exactly. So that's why we have to do the education. That's the whole piece. I mean, same thing. Listen, I was working on anti-apartheid. You think that everybody would get that in the beginning. The biggest
No, I'm sure they didn't.
The biggest thing that allows injustice to continue is people don't know the details. They don't know. Like, you ask the average American, do they know that the 13th Amendment allows for slavery in prison, like labor they don't.
Probably not.
And so that's the thing. Like, you start doing some surveys and say, do you believe that prison labor or slave labor should exist in the United States? People would say no. That's the same thing they said about private prisons, but they exist because people who are in control are continuing to work on that, and people who are like you and me, and we're the crazy lone folks in the wilderness, and the folks that are teaching our kids are not telling them what is happening. This is the real history.
Yep.
And so we have work to do. But I do believe that it is possible, and I believe that this is the time to really push it forward. Even though I say this, understanding that we don't even have a law that makes lynching illegal.
Yep. It is. We're in a place right now with our governance that it's very difficult to pass any kind of law, even common sense ones. The checks and balances are kind of working against us at the moment. And if you're the kind of person that doesn't want anything to pass, it's very easy for you to sit in the minority and watch things not pass. And we will see, right, if that corporal punishment bill were to get through the House, it'll probably get voted on at some point, I imagine. And this House would pass it, and then it would get filibustered in the Senate.
Very possible, very likely, but you never know.
Well, they're gonna.
What I think is that if you had a children's campaign, if you had a children's campaign that would bring attention to it, that would put it in a different light. Yeah,
we tried. We had not to get into it too much, but it was very difficult to get the kids are afraid of getting hit. So we tried to find kids who had been victims of corporal punishment. You really can't get them to talk about it publicly until they're not in that school anymore, because they think if they're going to get hit. And they're right. They're probably right. If they talk to me and I put them in a newspaper article, or I have them talk to Senator Harkin, they're going to go back to school and they're going to beat the shit out of them. Like, I don't really, and like that's, and we're not hearing from them because
you can still have the kids from that used to be beaten at the other school talk about.
And then a lot of them are like, I got out of it and I'm fine and I survived it. And they have a lot of it was difficult to. That seemed like it would have been very easy for me to, especially we had this meeting set up with the U.S. Senator. I felt like it would have been really easy to get kids to come in and talk about how poorly that went for them, and it wasn't easy. They wanted it. I might have been. I was also working on limited funding. Right? I couldn't travel all over the country talking to kids. I got accused. I had a sheriff call me at one point, and they were going to charge me with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. This is a country that has a lot of people opposed to progress of any kind, and they'll do extreme stuff to prevent it. And we don't necessarily do the same kind of extreme lengths to push it. Right? You got all kinds of Americans, you're right, who are like, I don't think we should have slavery. I don't think we should have corporal punishment. I don't think we should have this. We should have that. Right? And they'll be upset about it, and they'll tweet or share, maybe even donate to an organization. But everything they would need to do to stop it, they're not necessarily going to do all of that.
No, but if you start in those states where you do have a number of people, you have a critical mass of people who will work against it, and it passes in this state and another state, and it starts to pass in another state. That's what we did with Ban the Box. That's what we did with ending shackling against women. That's what we did with school to prison pipeline, high numbers of suspensions. That's what we did with funding organizations that were taking folks who had been involved in street organizations, what we all otherwise call gangs, and reintegrating them into community advocacy work. Like, all of that was stuff that people said wouldn't happen. And yet, when you start in the communities where you do have the support and make it happen, and then you take those folks and you talk to them into talking to the people in the next state over or the next state over, you can get momentum and get these things done. And that is exactly what we're going to do.
Yes. I believe that you are. I like how you said that. We have a working definition of philanthropy here at the Unfunded List. And without boring you with all the details on it, it is how you accomplish the impossible. Right? So without philanthropy, I would say that ending corporal punishment in this country is impossible. Capitalism is all you have left if you get rid of philanthropy, and capitalism wants to keep it. Philanthropy is the distribution of excess wealth. Someone or some fund has wealth that has now freed itself from the wheel of capitalism, and can be used to do the impossible, to change perspectives, to do the kind of stuff that you're talking about, to change things and you know what? Capitalism can do a lot of good positive social change as well. There's a lot fewer people living in
love in action.
Yeah, well, you can stuff that the normal way of things would never allow for can be done once we engage in philanthropy, and that's something that some notable Americans, Carnegie, Getty, Rockefeller, knew and understood. If you read Carnegie's like essays on philanthropy in the beginning, he talked about excess wealth all the time, about how he couldn't possibly spend the money that he had, and he was one of the first people in the history of humanity to have that issue. It's not. I won't call it a problem, right? There were Mansa Musa, a very wealthy man who owned Timbuktu, but he was Timbuktu. He had to pay for everything, the standing army, everything. He did not have excess money, right? And the same with all those Roman generals before him who were wealthy, and all of the wealthy people throughout history, right? Kings and queens had to build castles and walls and maintain armies, and the peasants were reliant on them for everything. They had all the money. Extreme levels of wealth inequality. In America, we got to the point where a lot of basics were provided, especially for the middle class and up. Didn't have to worry about a whole lot, right? And they could eventually have excess money. Not just the super wealthy, but the members of the upper middle class and middle class have more money than they need. It became kind of a common thing. They started donating to causes. We started curing diseases, right? Building community centers, building the world's greatest hospitals, building the world's greatest academies. Right, all kinds of stuff that the Industrial Revolution alone would not have accomplished. Right, we just have a bunch of steel. We have huge oil drums, steel-made oil drums, right? Right, and lots of statues of men.
And metal lunchboxes.
Yes, right, and the best iron lung money can buy, right? Right, and so one of the things that's very interesting to me about Giving Circles, we are co-reviewing with Giving Circles for the first time this spring, is this is an opportunity for folks who don't necessarily have Carnegie levels of wealth, right, to engage in philanthropy. You're nodding vigorously, which doesn't come through on a podcast.
Sorry, yes, that's true, very true. So Giving Circles, the beauty of this was that we had actually a donor that came to us, like I said, David Rosenmiller, who had been giving in an activist advised model where they just gave money to activists and said, you know more about this issue, you just distribute the money.
You call that an activist advised model? That's interesting. I've never heard that phrasing, but I like that.
Activist advised model. The funding exchange used to have it, and CJI started there. But CJI was a pilot of a different concept, which was that the donors and the activists would sit at the table together and discuss where the money went, because he wanted to hear directly from the organizers about what they were thinking and to learn more about the issues. And he felt that the activists could also learn more about the kind of things that donors want to know and are interested in. And so we decided to try it, and it has been an amazing experience. A lot of our donors felt like sometimes we call them activists, donor activists. They felt like this was a place that they could bring their whole selves. There's lots of donors that are operating incognito, right? They're volunteering or they're doing activist work, but they're not really disclosing that they're donors. And they felt like in this place they could be donors, and they could also identify with people who were doing this work that felt so important to them. And then for the activists, what was amazing about it was that they felt like, I am now, because once the money is at the table, everybody is sharing in the decision about where it goes. So I'm actually determining where resources are getting distributed. This is an amazing experience for me. This is an empowering experience for me. My experience in my community doing this work is actually an asset that's being recognized around this table. So that has made for some amazing relationships. We know each other's kids and births and deaths and families, and support each other and have actual real relationship outside of when we meet. We meet twice a year. Once is what we call a political education meeting for each circle, where we're learning more about what's happening in the field in that particular area that we're funding, and that we hear directly from activists. And then we design the RFP together. We agree on what we want to fund that addresses that. taking into account this new information that we just learned. And then we collectively decide on who gets the grants, and we collectively decide on how much money they get. It's not always easy, but it is an amazing transformational process because this is not something that otherwise people do together. Talk about money, right? I've literally had a millionaire at the same table with a person who did not know if they were going to be able to pay their rent, collectively deciding on where money was going to go. It is something amazing.
Yes, it does. It does sound interesting, and we have a partnership. You are co-review partners with us. We have 2 giving circles. There's another one based down in D.C., which is it's for like young professionals. I think they're giving 1% of their paycheck or something. And it's to DMV based organizations. I live here in DC, so care about it quite a bit. We also have a lot of evaluators who live here, and so I think we'll be helpful with those. We are so co-review is where my committee independently reviews proposals that were submitted to you. We give them the opportunity to opt in if they want extra outside help. And what we found is that in the beginning, it's a very small number that opt in. So we are co-reviewing 2 of your grantees, and we're going to do a really good job. I'm
sure you will.
The feedback deadline was last week. I've read, and I'm finalizing the reports, and we will send them out. I forget the names of your grantees that we're reviewing, but they're working on incarceration issues. And we'll send those reports out, and then we'll be reviewing again in the fall and then next spring, and then I imagine that each round will have a slightly larger batch. So why you already got a lot of perspective around the Giving Circle table, and I don't mean to talk myself out of a fun partnership, but why co-review with Unfunded List?
Because the bottom line is that this is what I believe, that it's really important for people to understand. The philanthropic sector is not something that people of limited means have any real experience with, connection to, history to, relationship with, right? We should not expect that because somebody may be really great at organizing people, or maybe great at motivating people, or maybe great at influencing others, that they are automatically going to know the best way to represent the work that they do on paper to a philanthropic organization. It's an entire industry, and nobody's born with it. And most of the people who we fund are coming out of communities where they've been impacted by injustice and injustice systems, right? So that means that they likely did not go to a school where during career day they talked about philanthropy as one of the professional options that you could pursue. So they don't know anything about how to do this, and they shouldn't be expected to. And so what we believe is that what you do, which is so amazing, is that you're going to provide them with that input to how they can best represent the work that they do, how they can strengthen the work that they do, how they can organize themselves in such a way that people will better understand what they can contribute to making a difference. And so that's why.
Yep. Great. I think that's the. If I could have written your answer, I would have written. Mine wouldn't have been written as well. But no, it's a great, obviously helpful for me to hear from our partners why they like it. And our mission is to educate the public about philanthropy. You're exactly right. There's all kinds of people in the world who have encountered a problem and have the beginnings, or even more than the beginnings, of a solution to that problem. Right? And that is a lot for one person to have done. And we currently live in a society that demands that they also have expertise in philanthropy, which is entirely different than encountering a problem and learning a solution to it.
Right.
And there's lots of misconceptions that we help address here. And we are doing we'll be doing a training session with some of your folks next week, talking about different entity types, 501c3s versus LLCs versus these other things, right? Which is, even to me, who's worked in philanthropy for a long time, it's just accountant's prattle. And when I'm evaluating a grant, right? If will they be able to accomplish the social change I want to accomplish? And that's a different. And then some accountant tells me if I'm allowed to give a grant to this organization or not because the paperwork is in order. That's not something that I need to know in order to decide if I want to give to them. Sometimes there are groups I'd like to give to, can't, because this giving vehicle needs to operate in this way, right? And there's really no way. It's a very small percentage of people in the world that understand how that works. Right?
It's a philanthropic alphabet soup, and most people don't get taught how to read that alphabet.
I mean, even people who are actual experts in like how a private foundation works, they may not understand the intricate differences between a private foundation and an operating foundation, or
absolutely,
or they're not going to know how a European foundation operates. And in fact, and sometimes the laws in how philanthropy works between different countries, what we would do in one country might actually be illegal in a different country.
Yeah.
There are countries, for instance, where if a foundation gives you a grant, it has to be restricted. If you don't spend all of it, you return it to the foundation. If you were to do that in the U.S., it would be tax fraud.
Right.
And how would anyone? Oh. There's really no way, because the donor took the tax deduction when they gave it to you. If you then give them the money back, that's a very big crime. you really can't do it that way. But it's how they do it, and it makes sense. I didn't spend all the money you gave me. Here's it back. Give it to other grantees, right? You would be committing a crime at that point.
Right.
And I've actually had people come to me and ask, like, I need to give this money back, right? I'm like, no, do not give the money. Never. Anyone listening to the podcast now, never give the money back. Never. Make them take it back. Even if, and honestly, we've had people who
they don't usually want the money.
No, they don't. They don't ever. They're not going to ask. They're not going to ask for it back.
What you do is you just make it clear how you can spend the money in a way that's going to support.
It's just it's an exact. We've had people ask me, like, we didn't spend everything we said. We gave them a budget, right? It said we were going to spend this much. It actually cost less. Do I need to return the money? They've asked me that.
Yeah, I know. They asked me too.
That's not even the dumbest question I've been asked about philanthropy.
Oh no, not at all.
And none of these people are dumb.
Right.
They're usually extremely, and it's a profession. About a third of the evaluators in our committee are professional philanthropists, which is another thing I have to explain to folks sometimes, right? Sometimes you're applying to a family fund. The family meets once a year. They might have they got all the things that families have, right? Interpersonal differences and family dynamic issues. Some families can build consensus easily, others not so much, right? Other times you might apply to a foundation that's called so-and-so family foundation, right? But it's staffed, but none of those family members are alive anymore. And it's staffed by professionals. In Chicago, there's the Robert McCormick Foundation. McCormick founded the Chicago Tribune. None of the McCormicks are involved in that. There's professionals working there. And some of them are on our committee. And when you apply to them, it's not, that's a professional with a stack of really good grant proposals. And if you don't get funded, the reason you didn't get funded is because you weren't one of the ones that they picked.
Right.
And that's not a comprehensive answer, but it's the answer every time. If you didn't get funded, it's because you weren't one of the ones that they picked. They had too many applications. Yours is probably very good. Let's get in and talk about what we can do with it. I assume all of your grantees who opt into us, they're going to get all their grants, right? But we will do our best to help them. If you're out there in the world and you're running a giving circle or you're some kind of program with a large number of grant proposals, you should consider a co-review partnership with the Unfunded List. You can be cool like our friend Aleah. I want to thank you very much for joining me for a good long interview. I'm sure that folks will benefit from hearing about your work. I look forward to co-reviewing CJI Fund proposals for many years to come. I will keep doing it until we actually do have, I promise I'll keep reviewing proposals with you until we actually get reparations for all those incarcerated folks, no matter how long that takes. I'll keep reading the proposals. Thank you very much, Aleah, for joining me at the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast. Good luck with your funding, and I look forward to reading more of your proposals. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for joining us.